Before we go over the incident that resulted in Henco's suspension, I want you to look at Law 9.20, with special focus on Law 9.20.a. This was the law the URC used to suspend Henco for 6 weeks instead of 4 weeks. The reason this is important is because the citing commissioner wrongfully cited Henco for a law that he never infringed. As you can see, Law 9.20.a clearly states that a player must not charge into a ruck or maul. Charging includes any contact made without binding onto another player in the ruck or maul. So in other words, if a player binds onto another player in the ruck, he did nothing illegal, meaning he can't get suspended under this law. Now you would think that the citing commissioner of the URC would know this law, yet it would seem they don't even read their own laws before citing players. As you can see with Law 9.20.b, it states, a player must not make contact with an opponent above the line of the shoulders. This was the only law where the URC had evidence to cite Henco. Understanding the difference between the two laws is important because, as you can see here with the regulations that the URC uses when they sanction players, the middle range entry point for Law 9.20.a is 6 weeks, and for Law 9.20.b, it is 4 weeks. Now let's look at the evidence. We see Henco binds onto his teammate. By definition, Henco is bound onto the ruck. Legally, Henco is bound onto the ruck. He did not charge into the ruck. Just focus on Henco. He clamps onto the ruck. He thus binds onto the ruck. This is not charging into the ruck. This angle shows the same thing. At point of contact, Henco's other arm is bound onto the ruck. The other angle showed this. Thus, Henco can't be guilty under Law 9.20.a because he was bound onto the ruck. He clearly shows this with his actions. Joe Davis was in the way because he was offside at the ruck and also impeding illegally at the ruck. Henco followed the laws and unintentionally makes contact with Joe's head. By definition, he is bound onto the ruck before he makes contact with Joe. According to the laws of the game, Henco is bound onto the ruck. So my question is this: why on earth was he cited for Law 9.20.a when he never infringed this law? He can't be cited for charging into the ruck if he literally binds onto the ruck. Henco only infringed Law 9.20.b. He made contact with the head of Joe Davis, but it was unintentional as he went in to legally join the ruck. So why was this classified as reckless? Henco never charged in, he used minimal force and legally joined the ruck. He can only be cited for Law 9.20.b. Now let's look at context. The ruck is formed, thus the offside lines are also formed. Joe Davis is clearly offside, illegally impeding at the ruck after it has formed. Henco is the closest Lions player at the ruck. The illegal actions of Joe forces Henco to react, where he now has to join the ruck to provide clean ball to his team. Henco reacts by following the laws and joins the ruck legally to provide his team with clean ball. Now the most important factor. Joe is resting on the Lions player at the ruck. He is offside and also not supporting his body weight. He is limiting Henco's ability to bind onto the ruck. If Joe followed the laws and supported his body weight by not resting on the Lions player, then it would have been impossible for Henco to hit his head. Thus, Henco did nothing reckless. Looking at all the evidence, it is clear that the URC has absolutely no idea what they are doing. They literally make stuff up to cite players for laws they never infringed. So how on earth are we supposed to trust them? Then the most concerning part of this video. I have reason to believe that Joe passed his HIA test in the game, and then failed an HIA test after the game, which the URC could have used against Henco, by saying he was responsible for the injury. Now if this is true, that would mean the URC and Dragons basically admits that they allowed a concussed player back onto the field to play 27 more minutes. I asked the URC and Dragons about this, and they didn't respond. So I did some research, and I found a lot of smoke. And where there is smoke, there is fire. Firstly, I went onto the Twitter page of Dragons to check their match day 23 against the Stormers. Interestingly enough, I saw that Joe Davies was completely left out of the squad, which is weird because he was a regular starter for them this season. Then I also saw their Twitter account talks about all the changes, all except one change. They don't mention Joe Davies. This was a red flag to me, so I did some more research. I went onto their website and checked their injury reports. They usually show all the players that were unavailable. I went through the names, and there is only one name missing. They don't mention Joe Davies. This tells me that the team is hiding something and didn't think anyone would notice it. So after that, I reached out to the URC and to the Dragons medical staff. As you can guess, they gave no response. If Joe Davies was never concussed, and the medical staff had nothing to hide, why can't they just tell me he is not injured? They are hiding something, and all signs points to Joe Davies being in his 12-day stand-down period because of a concussion. The reason they are scared to answer me truthfully is because that would mean they admit to completely messing up Henco's disciplinary hearing. I truly hope I'm wrong, because if I'm right, then it would mean the URC has absolutely no regard for player safety, and that they also have no integrity. After seeing no mention of Joe in the injury reports, I went back to look at the game, in order to see what happened in the time Joe got back onto the field, after passing his HIA test. Here we can see Joe Davies was allowed back onto the field. So, in essence, he passed his HIA test. This is important to know, because this means the medical staff cleared him of any head injury, which means that Henco did not injure him. This is important information to know, considering that they used this as evidence against Henco. Then this happens later in the game. Joe is defending at the try line. He goes in, head first, to try and tackle the ball carrier. His head hits the knee of the Lions player, and if you look closely, you'll notice how slow he is to get up. He also seems to be a bit groggy. This is important information which relates to evidence that was used against Henco. For context, the game ends at 82 minutes, which means that Joe played for 27 minutes after he passed his HIA test. Let's talk about reckless. Watch this in real time first. Was this safe? Would this be deemed reckless? Or does Henco have to break his neck first before this is deemed reckless? Ben Fry dives at the knees of Henco, lifting him into the air. He has his arms out, but is nowhere close to wrapping it around Henco's legs. This is extremely dangerous. Henco's legs are through the horizontal. He is flipped completely upside down. His head hits the ground with high force. How on earth is this not reckless? If he falls slightly differently, he breaks his neck. But according to the URC, this is completely fine. I ask you, URC, is this safe? Ben Fry almost broke Henco's neck. yet he was free to play the next weekend. It is the tackler's responsibility to bring Henco safe to ground, yet Ben Fry was nowhere close because he never wrapped his arms. Let's watch again. Ben Fry has his hands on the ground after he hits Henco's knees. That is not a genuine attempt to wrap. That is a cheap shot with no regards for the safety of Henco. In other words, it's reckless. He basically torpedoes himself directly into the knees of Henco. I have a simple question. Is Henco's legs through the horizontal? Look at how his legs and spine hyperextends. Look at his head hitting the ground. Is this safe? What happens if Henco breaks his neck here? One has to ask, did the citing commissioner even check this? If the goal is player safety, then why did this not get checked? Ask yourself this. Did Henco get lifted as he got hit? Yes, he got lifted. Was Henco brought to ground safely by Ben Fry? No, he was not. Did Henco's head hit the ground? Yes, it did. End of discussion. That is a red card infringement. Let's look at Law 9.18. It states, a player must not lift an opponent off the ground and drop or drive that player so that their head and/or upper body makes contact with the ground. Ben Fry lifted Henco off the ground, and he then dropped Henco so that his head and upper body makes contact with the ground. It's in the law, yet the citing commissioner for the URC has absolutely no idea what he is doing, which is frightening, since he is the one citing players. You would think that he has to understand the laws. Let's look at the sanction for Law 9.18. The low-end sanction for this would be 6 weeks. In this case, with Henco almost breaking his neck, it most likely should have been, at minimum, a middle-range infringement. Yet, Ben Fry did not even get a warning for this. How on earth does this happen in a professional competition? All I can say is this: shame on you, URC. Shame on you. I found this online. This is the head of officiating for the URC. Listen to him basically saying that the URC ignores the opinion of fans.
You've put in any sports supports, or have you to be conscious of the just extra scrutiny and extra conversations that are happening around your referees and how it might affect them on a weekly basis?
Yeah, Rory, we realize that's happening. What used to be in the past, before we had Twitter and Facebook and Instagram and all these media forums, it was the referee decisions was talked about and criticized as well, but that was in the bar and that's where it stayed. But because of media now, it goes across the world within minutes. Those opinions that usually was expressed around a beer in a bar and talked about and discussed, and then everybody leave it, and then it stays in that bar or on the counter or around that table. It now goes onto social media, and that's how we as match officials look at it. It's the bar talk that has now become media, and it's social media, and we can't give it any attention. And sometimes for me personally, I say it's like graffiti on a toilet wall. It means nothing. But that is what it is, and that's how we look at it. It is hugely important for our match officials to stay focused on who is giving them the right information and who is talking to them about their performance, and not go on social media to understand what their performance or their decision was. So, Rory, I hope that answers your question.
What you just listened to there was the URC telling us fans, we mean nothing to them. This is the same guy who won the World Rugby Referee Award for 2022. You can't make this stuff up. It's a joke. Again, this guy won the World Rugby Referee Award for 2022, yet can't answer my simple questions regarding the incompetence of the URC. But it shouldn't be surprising to us. He basically admitted that, to the URC, the opinion of fans means absolutely nothing. I have given them more than enough time to respond to my videos, yet they failed to do so. The URC and Dragons thought they could get away with this. They assumed nobody would notice. They think that we as fans are too dumb to see through their incompetence. This has to stop, and they have to answer for this.